The Second Sino-Japanese War was a military conflict fought primarily between the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan from 1937 to 1945. It followed the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894–95. China fought Japan, with some economic help from Germany, the Soviet Union, the British Empire and the United States. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the war would merge into the greater conflict of World War II as a major front of what is broadly known as the Pacific War. The Second Sino-Japanese War was the largest Asian war in the 20th century. It accounted for the majority of civilian and military casualties in the Pacific War, with anywhere between 10 and 25 million Chinese civilians and over 4 million Chinese and Japanese military personnel dying from war-related violence, famine, and other causes. The war was the result of a decades-long Japanese imperialist policy aimed at expanding its influence politically and militarily in order to secure access to raw material reserves and other economic resources in the area, particularly food and labor, and engage war with others in the policy context of aggressive modernized militarism in the Asia-Pacific. At the height of imperial rule, assistance associations Hideki Tojo Cabinet and with the order from Emperor Showa. Before 1937, China and Japan fought in small, localized engagements, so-called incidents. In 1931, the Japanese invasion of Manchuria by Japan's Kwantung Army followed the Mukden Incident. The last of these incidents was the Marco Polo Bridge Incident of 1937, which marked the beginning of total war between the two countries. Initially, the Japanese scored major victories, such as the Battle of Shanghai, and by the end of 1937 captured the Chinese capital of Nanking. After failing to stop the Japanese in Wuhan, the Chinese central government was relocated to Chongqing in the Chinese interior. By 1939, after Chinese victories in Changsha and Guangxi, and with stretched lines of communications deep into the Chinese interior territories, the war had reached a stalemate. The Japanese were also unable to defeat the Chinese Communist forces in Shaanxi, which continued to perform sabotage operations against the Japanese using guerrilla warfare tactics. On December 7, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and the following day the United States declared war on Japan. The United States began to aid China via airlift material over the Himalayas after the Allied defeat in Burma that closed the Burma Road. In 1944, Japan launched a massive invasion and conquered Henan and Changsha. However, this failed to bring about the surrender of Chinese forces. In 1945, Chinese Expeditionary Force resumed its advance in Burma and completed the Ledo Road linking India and China. At the same time, China launched large counter-offensives in South China and retook the West Hunan and Guangxi. Despite continuing to occupy some of Chinese territory, Japan eventually surrendered on September 2, 1945 to Allied forces following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet invasion of Japanese-held Manchuria. The remaining Japanese occupation troops in China formally surrendered on September 9, 1945, with the following International Military Tribunal for the Far East convened on April 29, 1946. At the outcome of the Cairo Conference of November 22–26, 1943, the Allies of World War II decided to restrain and punish the aggression of Japan by restoring all the territories that Japan annexed from China, including Manchuria, Formosa, and the Pescadores, to the Republic of China, and to expel Japan from the Korean Peninsula. China was recognized as one of the Big Four of allies during the war and became one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council at the end of the war. Etymology: name in the Chinese language. The war is most commonly known as the War of Resistance against Japan, and also known as the 8 Years' War of Resistance, simply War of Resistance, or Second Sino-Japanese War. It is also referred to as the Anti-Fascist War, particularly by those connected with the Chinese Communist Party and PRC government. In Japan, nowadays, the name Japan-China War is most commonly used because of its perceived objectivity. In Japan today, it is written as in Shinjitai. When the invasion of China proper began in earnest in July 1937 near Beijing, the government of Japan used the North China Incident. And with the outbreak of the Battle of Shanghai the following month, it was changed to the China Incident. The word "incident" was used by Japan, as neither country had made a formal declaration of war. Especially, Japan wanted to avoid intervention by other countries, particularly the United Kingdom and the United States, which were its primary source of petroleum. The United States was also its biggest supplier of steel. If it was formally expressed that the fighting had already escalated to general war, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt would have been legally obliged to impose an embargo on Japan in observance of the U.S. Neutrality Acts. Other names in Japanese propaganda. The invasion of China became a holy war, the first step of the Hakoichiu. In 1940, Japanese Prime Minister Fumimaro Kono launched the Taisei Yokosankai. When both sides formally declared war in December 1941, the name was replaced by Greater East Asia War. Although the Japanese government still uses the term China Incident in formal documents, the word China is considered derogatory by China, and therefore the media in Japan often paraphrase with other expressions like the Japan-China Incident, which were used by media as early as the 1930s. The name Second Sino-Japanese War is not commonly used in Japan, as the war it fought with the Qing dynasty in 1894 is called the Qing-Japanese War, rather than the First Sino-Japanese War. Background: First Sino-Japanese War. The origin of the Second Sino-Japanese War can be traced to the First Sino-Japanese War of 1894–95, in which China, then under the Qing dynasty, was defeated by Japan and was forced to cede Formosa, and to recognize the nominal independence of Korea in the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Japan had also allegedly annexed the Diaoyu-dao, Senkaku Islands in early 1895 as a result, being the victors of this war. The Qing dynasty was on the brink of collapse from internal revolts and foreign imperialism, while Japan had emerged as a great power through its effective measures of modernization. Republic of China. The Republic of China was founded in 1912, following the Xinhai Revolution, which overthrew the Qing dynasty. However, central authority disintegrated and the Republic's authority succumbed to that of regional warlords. Unifying the nation and repealing imperialism seemed a very remote possibility. Some warlords even aligned themselves with various foreign powers in an effort to wipe each other out. For example, the warlord Zhang Zuolin of Manchuria openly cooperated with the Japanese for military and economic assistance. 21 Demands. In 1915, Japan issued the 21 Demands to extort further political and commercial privilege from China. Following World War I, Japan acquired the German Empire's sphere of influence in Shandong, leading to nationwide anti-Japanese protests and mass demonstrations in China. But China under the Beiyang government remained fragmented and unable to resist foreign incursions. To unite China and eradicate regional warlords, the Kuomintang in Guangzhou launched the Northern Expedition of 1926–28 with the help of the Soviet Union. Jinan Incident. The Kuomintang National Revolutionary Army swept through China until it was checked in Shandong, where conflict erupted as it approached the city of Jinan. Confrontations occurred which culminated in the Jinan Incident of 1928, during which time the Japanese military executed several Chinese officials and fired artillery shells into Jinan. Between 2,000 and 11,000 civilians were believed to have been killed. According to an inquest following the incident, Japanese civilians were tortured and killed by NRA soldiers during the incident. The incident severely deteriorated relations between China and Japan. Nominal unification of China. In the same year, Zhang Zuolin was assassinated when he became less willing to cooperate with Japan. Afterwards, Zhang's son Zhang Zuoliang quickly took over control of Manchuria. Despite strong Japanese lobbying efforts to continue the resistance against the KMT, he soon declared his allegiance to the Kuomintang government under Chiang Kai-shek, which resulted in the nominal unification of China at the end of 1928. Communist Party of China. In 1930, large-scale civil war broke out between warlords who had fought in alliance with the Kuomintang during the Northern Expedition and the central government under Chiang. In addition, the Chinese Communists revolted against the central government following a purge of its members by the KMT in 1927. The Chinese government diverted much attention into fighting these civil wars, following a policy of first internal pacification, then external resistance. Invasion of Manchuria, interventions in China. The chaotic situation in China provided excellent opportunities for Japanese expansionism. Japan saw Manchuria as a limitless supply of raw materials, a market for its manufactured goods, and as a protective buffer state against the Soviet Union in Siberia. Japan invaded Manchuria outright after the Mukden incident in September 1931. Japan charged that their rights in Manchuria, established by the Russo-Japanese War, had been systematically violated and that there were more than 120 cases of infringement of rights and interests, interference with business, boycott of Japanese goods, unreasonable taxation, detention of individuals, confiscation of properties, eviction, demand for cessation of business, assault and battery, and the oppression of Korean residents. After 5 months of fighting, the puppet state of Manchukuo was established in 1932, with the last emperor of China, Pui, installed as its puppet ruler. Militarily too weak to challenge Japan directly, China appealed to the League of Nations for help. The League's investigation led to the publication of the Lytton Report, condemning Japan for its incursion into Manchuria, and causing Japan to withdraw from the League of Nations. Appeasement being the predominant policy of the day, no country was willing to take action against Japan beyond tepid censure. Incessant fighting followed the Mukden incident. In 1932, Chinese and Japanese troops fought a battle known as the January 28 incident. This resulted in the demilitarization of Shanghai, which forbade the Chinese from deploying troops in their own city. In Manchukuo there was an ongoing campaign to defeat the anti-Japanese volunteer armies that arose from widespread outrage over the policy of non-resistance to Japan. In 1933, the Japanese attacked the Great Wall region, the Tangu Truce taking place in its aftermath, giving Japan control of Johor province as well as a demilitarized zone between the Great Wall and Beiping-Tianjin region. Japan aimed to create another buffer zone between Manchukuo and the Chinese nationalist government in Nanjing. Japan increasingly exploited internal conflicts in China to reduce the strength of its fractious opponents. This was precipitated by the fact that even years after the Northern Expedition, the political power of the nationalist government was limited to just the area of the Yangtze River Delta. Other sections of China were essentially in the hands of local Chinese warlords. Japan sought various Chinese collaborators and helped them establish governments friendly to Japan. This policy was called the Specialization of North China, more commonly known as the North China Autonomous Movement. The northern provinces affected by this policy were Chaha, Sui-Yuan, Hebei, Shanxi, and Shandong. This Japanese policy was most effective in the area of what is now Inner Mongolia and Hebei. In 1935, under Japanese pressure, China signed the Hiyamezu Agreement, which forbade the KMT from conducting party operations in Hubei. In the same year, the Chindo-Ihara Agreement was signed expelling the KMT from Chahar. Thus, by the end of 1935, the Chinese government had essentially abandoned northern China. In its place, the Japanese-backed East Hubei Autonomous Council and the Hubei Chahar Political Council were established. There in the empty space at Chahar, the Mongol military government was formed on May 12, 1936. Japan providing all necessary military and economic aid. Afterwards, Chinese volunteer forces continued to resist Japanese aggression in Manchuria, and Chahar and Sui Yuan.